This is Gestoras. Today's episode is in English. El episodio de hoy de Gestoras es en inglés. Pueden leer una transcripción en español en nuestro sitio web o pueden ver el episodio en YouTube con subtítulos en español. Gestoras podcast brings you conversations with cultural managers from the North and the South. We celebrate the work of Latina cultural managers, sharing their stories of success, challenges, and lessons learned. The episodes alternate between Spanish and English each week. Stephanie Ybarra is a program officer in the Arts and Culture program of the Mellon Foundation, with a focus on performing arts. Before joining the foundation, she served as artistic director of Baltimore Center Stage, where she broke ground as the country's first Latina artistic director of a League of Resident Theaters member theater. During her tenure, she was instrumental in leveraging powerful artistic works as a catalyst for conversation, reflection, and action. Prior to taking on the role of artistic director of Baltimore Center Stage in 2018, Stephanie served as the director of special artistic projects at the Public Theater, where she led the mobile unit and public forum programs. She first launched her career in her home state of Texas at the Dallas Theater Center and Dallas Children's Theater, later transitioning to institutions including the Yale Repertory Theater, Two River Theater Company, and Citizen Schools, a national after-school program based in Boston. While in New York, she co-founded the Artists' Anti-Racism Coalition, a grassroots organizing effort to dismantle systems of oppression in the off-Broadway community. Stephanie's work has been widely recognized, with awards including the Josephine Abity Award for Producing from New York's League of Professional Theater Women, the Yerba Buena Center for the Arts 100 in 2019, the Congressional Award for Achievement in Excellence from Sara Aina, an international nonprofit dedicated to community-engaged art making, and for her sustained work around diversity and inclusion, she received the prestigious Nation Building Award from the National Black Caucus of State Legislators in 2018. Stephanie serves as a faculty member at the Juillard School and New York University. She's currently on the board of Citizen University Make Believe Association, as well as the Artistic Council for the People's Theater Project. She holds an MFA from the Yale School of Drama and a BFA from Baylor University. Hi, Stephanie. It's so good to have you here to hear about your story and hear about how it was that you became you. So I guess that's my first question for you. How did Stephanie Ybarra get to be Stephanie Ybarra? What built you?
I love that question, and there's I guess there are some simple ways to answer that question, and some ways that are I think appropriately complex. When I think about the simple ways to answer that question, I think I am who I am because of my family. I am who I am because I am the oldest of three sisters, and I am who I am because I had myriad matriarchs to sort of look up to and to model my own self after. The more complex conversation or answer to that question is I am who I am because my whole life I have had to have one foot there and one foot here. And that started from jump because my mother and father are interracial, maybe is not the appropriate term, but my father is Mexican American and my mother is Czech, aka just straight up white. And that my father was a darker skinned Mexican American, and so that dynamic, the cultural dynamic back in 1976 when they had me, really set the stage for how my parents raised me, how my father interacted with our shared culture or not, as the case was, and how I had to navigate a kind of dual identity, and understand and love and come to love both identities, I guess, both sides of my family. So having to traverse all of that complexity is how I get to where I am today and who I am today.
Can you tell me a little bit more about how that impacted you? So, did you learn Czech? Did you learn Spanish? Were those identities suppressed, encouraged?
Sure. So I grew up speaking only English, though I know the bad words in both Czech and Spanish, because
Good. You
both,
know the
it's interesting,
fundamentals.
both, exactly, the basics.
The basics are it's
But
important.
the but the both sides of my family, um, folks immigrated at the same point. So that's my both great grandparents on both sides. And so both grandparents on both sets of grandparents had all of the language, all of the culture. And both sets of grandparents made an active decision to cut it off. And that's most relevant for me because I'm walking through the world with olive brown skin and dark, like wiry, sometimes frizzy, always curly hair. Um, it impacted me most with my Spanish or lack thereof, and the lore in my family. It's not even lore. It's a literal true story. My father, Alejandro Suarez Ibarra, was the oldest of five to Graciela Ibarra and Alex Sr. And my dad was born in the States, but he grew up. He spent the first 5 years of his life on an army base in Germany. And the story goes that my dad's first language was Spanish. And then they got to this army base, and he was out on the playground, and none of the kids were playing with him because he didn't speak English and they didn't speak Spanish. And so my grandparents made the decision to speak in English. They argued in Spanish. They yelled in Spanish. They like watched the telenovelas and everything else in Spanish, but to their kids, English. So they made an active choice to assimilate. So my dad, when he passed away in 2018, 2019, I'm sorry, he had, I would say, like a child's level of Spanish.
Hmm.
Um, my aunts and uncles, to my knowledge, don't have much, if at all. And so me and my cousins and my sisters have all then spent lots of money trying to learn Spanish. But so that's just like one tiny example of uh, the ways that my culture was present, but also I felt actively dissuaded from leaning into it. I grew up in San Antonio, Texas, which is like, you know, it's an incredibly Mexican city, but Mexican was not a word. It's not a good word, when I was growing up to be saying I'm Mexican or I'm Mexican American. That was not a thing um, that we leaned into, even though it was always there, it was present. It was just I will always remember asking my father, like, "What am I?" Because somebody at school said, "What are you?" And he said, "You're," he said, "You're my daughter, and you're Texan, and you're American."
Hmm.
That's it.
So the goal was assimilation, right, rather than uh, digging into those identities. Yeah, as a kid, I spent a few years, same years, early 70s, in the United States as well. And that was very much the thrust of it, is to assimilate, to not, in fact, the Latin identity was seen as something shameful, right? Or less than, you should. The next step was to progress into being having an American accent and an American identity, a white American identity. Yeah. So another part
Exactly.
of where your
Exactly.
life led you has to do with your being an artistic director and being in theater. So what role did that play in your family? Are your family in theater? Are they, or was it just you? How did that happen?
Just just me. Well, my parents were musicians, so
Mm.
I grew up listening to them play all of the woodwind instruments. I grew up going to band rehearsals, symphony rehearsals, orchestra rehearsals, um, and so in some ways, they really didn't have a leg to stand on when I was like, I want to go into theater. They were sort of like, okay, well, who are we to talk?
Right.
But they were super supportive of me throughout my career. Never once told me to have a fallback. Never once told me, they were great. But well, theater specifically is doesn't show up, I think, anywhere else really to this degree in my family, even in my extended family. Um, my my family, like especially on the Ibarra and Suarez side, is like there's lots of writers and photographers. Like the arts are present in my ancestry for sure. So I think this is just another manifestation, a natural manifestation of what's in my DNA.
So how did you come to artistic direction? How did you find your way there, and what was it about it that you said this is my place?
I didn't even really know that title so I,
Mm.
through high school, I wanted to be an actor because we all, and I went to undergrad and studied acting, and I still, like, I was not familiar with like the structures of our theaters. Um, and the very first time I got an inkling was um, when I applied for an internship in Dallas as an actor one summer during undergrad, and I did not get it. And the one of the people who was on the adjudicating panel, she's the founding artistic director of Dallas Children's Theater. Her name is Robin Flatt.
Mm.
And in my interview, she had asked me, have you ever considered running a theater? And
Ah,
I truthfully, at that point, at whatever, 20, 21 years old, I was like, no, I didn't, I never considered that. I will. Do you want me to? What do you, what do I need to do to get this internship? So that was like the very, very, very first like nascent seed, but I still didn't connect it to artistic direction. That wouldn't come until much later after I'd sort of moved on from acting and worked in administration in various capacities. And then, like, again, remember I said 1 foot here, 1 foot there.
right.
I felt like the industry wanted me to choose a side, business or art, and
Mm.
I did not want to choose. And so I it wasn't until in the last 10 years of my career that I'm like, oh, okay, I think I see a way to get to use both my business acumen and my artistic acumen. Um, and it seems like the field might be ready for somebody like me to be sitting in the seat of artistic director. And so by somebody like me in this context, I mean I don't mean a woman, and I don't actually mean a Latina. I mean somebody who knows math, who can math and dramaturg and raise money and read a balance sheet and produce. Like somebody with that skill set. Um, so yeah, that's but I had to I had to be sort of shown that, invited into that headspace,
Mm.
and then invited into processes for artistic leadership positions um, in order to actually be able to make my way there.
That's an interesting point. The role of artistic director, or the competencies of artistic director, have changed, and they are now requiring all sorts of other things that aren't just the creative approach, right, to a work, but require all these other skills that you had. So in a way, it's just the field met you where you were. You were the first Latina to be named artistic director of a Lort theater. That's a big deal. What was that experience like for you to finally have a theater that you were leading?
Yeah. It was so surreal. My dear friend Maria Goyanis at Woolly Mammoth Theater in DC. She came to visit because we were together at the Public. She came to visit me in Baltimore, and we were going up the elevator. I was like, Maria, somebody gave me the keys to this theater. Like, I run this place, and she was like, I know, it's so crazy. The but the it came with like not to get all like Spider-Man, but great, with great power, great responsibility. Um, I felt a tremendous amount of pressure, um, from the like some of it was self-imposed, but a lot of it was coming from my beloved community of artists and the BIPOC theater makers and what have you, that I didn't understand this until I was almost a year into my tenure, but the expectation of me, because I was a vocal proponent of anti-racism, because I am a currently light brown skinned woman. um, I started to feel like the expectation was that I should fix it immediately,
Mm.
and that I could fix it immediately. And so
And that it can be fixed immediately.
yeah, correct. And so that so I disappointed a lot of people and myself, and I did not. Yeah, that was the biggest sort of surprise, I
Mm.
think, for me stepping into a leadership position. And then the other surprise was, I don't know why I was surprised by this, but I told everybody who I was throughout the interview process. Um, and somehow me and who I am still surprised some people, and they were very unhappy with it.
Mm.
So getting to revisit some of the um, dynamics that I experienced when I was growing up was, I didn't expect it to come back with such fury, but it did.
Do you think it was that the perception of who you would be was stronger than what was in front of them?
Maybe I still haven't figured some of this out. I think I'll be processing it and healing from it for quite a long time. Um, but you know, when I programmed my first season, the writers and directors were overwhelmingly brown and black people. The folks who were staffing the shows were overwhelmingly brown and black people, and I immediately started getting all of it is the usual stuff. You have an agenda. This is so political, blah, 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 meow, 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 meow.
Mhm.
And from some of the larger public the sort of folks who are not inside or close to the institution, I get it. They didn't have a say or a stake in choosing me. But then there were folks who were closer to the process, who had heard me say these things throughout my interview process, and nobody can look at my producing record, the casting of
Mm.
the mobile units, all of it. Nobody could look at that and then look at what I did at Baltimore Center Stage and be like, "Oh, I'm shocked." It's pretty obvious to me,
Right.
um, but also, people hear what they want to hear. They see what they want to see. I believe that the folks who were so hateful to me were also. I legitimately believe that they want what is best for their community and their institution, and we just go about it different ways. And there's a generational situation, there's a gender
Mm.
situation, and all of those things are operating. So I have quite a lot of compassion for some folks and less compassion for others.
While you were there, though, in the midst of all of this, you were a co-founder, right, of the Artist Anti-Racism Coalition. Was that a result of what you were experiencing in those moments? Was that at the end of a process? How did that happen?
That came actually before my artistic directorship. So that was going on. That
Mm.
started while I was at the Public Theater. Um, so my a few classmates of my from grad school and Roberta Pereira and Jacob Padron and David Roberts. We all were in grad school together. We are all people of color, and we were all inside of institutions at the time where I don't, I don't think one of us was running one. Maybe Roberta was running one, but we were all inside of institutions where we had a high degree of like uh, how do you say, like protection. Like we weren't going to get fired for shooting off our mouth, you know. And in my case, at the public theater, you know, I had a boss who encouraged it. So that that coalition was born of, like many things, the 2016 election, and it was born of a shared training that we all did, the Undoing Racism and Community Organizing workshop with the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond.
Mm,
And the provocation inside of that training was to apply the anti-racism principles to our own backyard. And for us, that meant the off-Broadway theater community. So it was really born of a desire to like finally start having some hard conversations, and to be able to do that from like this perch that we had all climbed just high enough that
right.
people would take our phone calls, but we had not climbed high enough yet that we could be toppled. Like we had a layer between us. So we were like,
Right.
you know,
Right.
we have the privilege now to do this. Let's do it.
I want to come back to something you said a little bit earlier too, where you said that when you were at Center Stage, you experienced some of the things that you had experienced as a child and that you had hoped to live behind. And I'm curious about your skin experience over the course of your lifetime. How did that change from Texas to New York to Baltimore, if it changed at all?
I really appreciate that question. It has changed so drastically over the course of my life, and the thing that I don't know if I've ever shared this like publicly. It's not something. It just doesn't come up in casual conversation. But when I was a child, so I was in San Antonio, Texas. I told you my father had darker skin. I would say he was on the darker side of the spectrum. I spent a lot of time in the sun. I was like brown. Um, and in the context of San Antonio, in the context of Texas, I looked Mexican. And then the Mexicans sometimes did not know what to do with me because of, there's some bone structure stuff going on. Um,
The
but
checks.
my that's right, that's right. It's the Eastern Europeans came through. This little Chexican running around and like nobody knows what to do with her. Um, but the um, I remember getting asked so many times, "What are you? What are you? What are you?" So already like presenting in a way that people did not know what to do with me. But the those that did, so my mother's extended family um, it expressed quite a lot of overt bigotry to my father. They didn't go to the wedding, and to me and my sisters, but me because I was the firstborn. So, uh, you know, I was the dirty Mexican. My father was the dirty Mexican. To this day, that side of the family, like, you, like we had, when we have to encounter them, like you can feel it sort of wafting off of them. Um, but I would look around and see myself as other. I never once in my whole life, never once, um, has anybody ever treated me like I was white. Nobody has ever assumed I'm white. Um, and in fact, the because my skin was dark enough, and because my father's skin was dark enough, I'll never forget this. One summer, we used to always go to my grandparents' farm south of Houston. This is on the Czech side of my family. We used to go to my Czech grandparents had a farm and have a farm, and we used to go and for like I don't know 4 or 5 weeks. I think that's what it felt like. Me and my sisters. And one summer we did not go. And I didn't find out until much later that that summer we didn't go because the extended family on my mom's side had issued death threats. they had offered up death threats to me and my younger sister, Michelle, simply because
What?
we were the spawn of the dirty Mexican. Yes. And so my mom was like, I'm not sending you to the farm. Um, so on the one hand, like where my skin experience starts, is at best, it starts at what am I? What are you? And at worst, it manifested in threats against my life because of the color of my skin. Over the course of my lifetime, as my skin has gotten thinner, I watched it happen to my grandmother. I watched it happen to my father. My skin has gotten lighter now, and I don't spend as much time in the sun. um, by the time I got to Baltimore, I was among the lighter skinned folks in any given room, unless I was in a room full of donors. And um, and in a room full of predominantly white folks, they were I was constantly reminded that I was not white. And there was one man who came up to me. It was very early in my tenure, and he was like, I think the word Latinx is bullshit. Direct quote. And I was like, oh, this is where we're starting. I think the word Latinx is bullshit. I don't know why you're not Hispanic. Hispanic was good enough for your father. I don't know why it's not good enough for you. And I was like, well, sir, my father died 2 months ago. So thank you for that. And also, that you're making a ton of assumptions, and please be gone. I was shocked to be confronted with like that level of I don't even know what to call that: racism, bigotry, privilege, whatever. But to me,
And
those,
hostility, right? Straight up hostility.
yes, like overt hostility to me and my culture, and the way I was choosing to embrace it and lean into it, and so it felt like this weird. Um, there it was like bookending experiences of my life that even as an adult, even as my skin has gotten lighter, even as like I was in Baltimore, which is predominantly black city, but very black and white, I was like, oh, okay, maybe, I don't know, maybe I like live more on over here on this spectrum. And no, absolutely not. They were very quick to remind me that I was not one of them.
These are things that you carry with you, right? That impact how you confront the world, how you enter spaces. When you enter a new space or you begin a new project, what is your philosophy? Like what's in your head? How do you approach your work?
Mm. I'm always, whether I'm producing a piece of theater, or in the case of my new gig at the Mellon Foundation, engaging in conversations with potential grantees or current grantees, I think I'm always trying to help to co-construct the conditions for people to be their actual human selves in a space
Mhm.
in every meeting, or in every production. And I say co-construct because I believe deeply that when there is more than one person in a space, the space is co-constructed. And I want to honor that. Um, and then, you know, the sort of bring your full self, I'm putting air quotes, bring your full self to the process or to the room. It feels like trite or played out in terms of a term, but like actually leaning into what do the conditions look like for this range of humans to be able to show up as themselves. That is not simple at all, and it changes with every constellation of humans on any given day. And so I don't know. That's always the goal, because if people can show up as their full selves, then the chances are, whatever the assignment is for that group of people, whether it's making a play, um, or talking about a grant or whatever, it's going to be a healthier environment for everybody. It's one of those things that I think raises all boats.
So that's in how you work and why you work the way you work. And you just mentioned that you've moved from being an artistic director, which you've done for quite some time, and now you're on the funder side. What do you hope to accomplish as a funder? What is your goal?
I think the part of why I was brought onto the team at Mellon was to help provide a sort of bird's eye view, to help fill out the kind of bird's eye view of the arts and culture sector in this country. So I'm coming with obviously my deep theater knowledge, but being asked and invited to apply that and look across artistic disciplines, which is really exciting. And that allows for a kind of systemic analysis. There's just different or systemic interventions that is very different than what I could do at one theater. And when I think about what I hope to accomplish, first and foremost right now, I am just so happy to be back in like a deep, deep, deep moment of learning. Like I'm constantly on my learning edge in this position, and that's very different, having spent 30 years making theater, and now to be like, I don't know what today is supposed to look like. So I'm going to learn as much as I can, but also I think helping the philanthropic space to get 1% better, at 1% more sophisticated in whatever work we're setting out to do. And I feel really lucky that Mellon, that culture is already alive and kicking at the Mellon Foundation, and my colleagues in arts and culture, I'm just learning from them constantly. It's brilliant. It is brilliant to feel like I'm sitting inside of conversations where I'm intimidated by the intellect in the room, where I am like sitting in silence mostly because I just cannot help but like voraciously, absorb what my colleagues are saying. And it's glorious. So, but I hope I get to a place where I can pitch in and help leave it 1% better than when I found it.
That sounds so exciting. It's always so exciting to be with really smart people who love what they do, who know what they do, and who are open to having discussions and conversations of what they know. I'm really happy for you that you have that space finally. It looks like you've had a tough time with certain sectors, right, of the folks you have to deal with. And I imagine now that you're speaking to so many different potential grantees that you also have to do a bit of translating. How do you approach that? How do you approach either resolving conflicts or resolving misunderstandings or that kind of interpersonal challenges? Where do you come at?
I try to come from a place of I am not conflict averse, and so I believe actually really deeply in healthy and healthy conflict, or as I like to call it, to productive dissatisfaction. And so I think it comes back to creating the conditions for folks to be their full selves, which comes with conflict, mess, opinions that aren't like everybody else's. And so once that container is available to folks, then conflict, it's never easy, but it can feel generative and easeful. And so if I am facilitating a tense moment, then I will almost always default to leaning in and asking questions. Say more, say more, say more, say more, to get to understanding. And if I am participating in the conflict, then it is harder sometimes for me to have the very open mind, but I try always to bring a yes and into the space. And I try so hard to hold to like name multiple truths so that that I am not falling into the trap of who is right and who is wrong, that the binary is right and wrong. Because more often than not, that binary is not applicable where conflict lives.
Right. And in conflict, when people dig in, a lot of times I feel it's about control, right? About retaining control of the narrative and retaining control of truth, of a truth, trying to find a truth and digging into it. And it seems for what you're doing with asking these probing questions, right? These expansive questions, you're creating a path through which I'm not going to say it's comfortable, but it's a little easier to open up and show a little bit of vulnerability and loosen control a little bit to continue to have a conversation, to get to something that's more generative.
Yeah. There's also something in conflict that is, I think you're right to point out sort of like vulnerability and as a tool inside of as a driver and as a tool for helping to resolve conflict. Because I think conflict is also a lot of times driven by fear. Fear of what, depends on the circumstances, but unearthing whether it's a fear of loss of control or a fear of looking stupid or a fear of, like there are so many fears that we are carrying around with us. And so sometimes unearthing whatever, even if it seems like a small fear to somebody, those stakes can be very high for somebody else, and helping to understand that, mitigate that, that can go a long way.
It looks like in your position, you can create the conditions, or you can try to create the conditions where that can happen. Well, speaking of the future and speaking of conditions, we're nearing the end of our time, and I wish we weren't. My question is, someone who is, just coming up into either arts management or coming up into the theater realm or wants to be a funder, who wants to occupy these spaces as well. And she comes to you for advice. Stephanie Ybarra, please tell me, what advice do you have for me? What would you say to her?
Mm. I have had these questions. So there are a couple of refrains that I say to folks who ask, and that I still say to myself. The first is our pathways are nonlinear. There's not necessarily a straight line between point A and point B, and to embrace the nonlinear pathways. And number two is do not negotiate with yourself. Do not negotiate yourself out of an opportunity. If you have a question as to whether or not you are quote unquote qualified, default to yes, I am. And the kind of, as it relates to career advancement, et cetera, it's sort of a good rule of thumb is the only job you have is to create as many possibilities for yourself as there are, and so saying yes to opportunities to apply or to speak up or to nominate yourself or what have you, to fight against the way that we are socialized, to diminish or to question, fight against that and create possibilities and opportunities and pathways.
The socialization part is very hard, right? Because women are told, especially when they're younger, right, that they have to wait until they are worthy of, can step into those places, right?
That's right.
So, as we talked about before, the last couple of questions are the one that another gestora has left. And then I'm going to ask you what question you're going to leave for somebody else. So, your question is left for us by Mercedes Cachash. She is the co-artistic director of the Sunfest Festival in London, Ontario. And she asks, how are you embracing your femininity and presenting your femininity as you are moving forward? And what does femininity mean to you? So a very easy question she's left.
I think I'll start with the like, what does femininity mean to me? I am still in the process of unlearning the sort of unhelpful gendered constructs and expectations of femininity, and looking for the ways that the feminine inside of me and in the world can most be most impactful. And I struggle with, I grew up in Texas, so I was socialized really, really well in what it means to be a lady and what it means to be Southern and all of these things. And so I still struggle mightily with who I am innately as it relates to the expectations put upon me. And they are all across gender lines. And so I've, with the help and mentorship of some youths, some of my favorite people are queer, non-binary, trans youths of color. If they're listening to this, they're going to be so happy. But I've learned quite a lot from them on how to reject some of the constructs and how to understand femininity and feminine, the femme in general, in a more expansive way. And so that's the journey. That's the journey I'm on. I lean into the feminine, but even the word femininity, like the feminine divine and femininity, like start to make my brain hurt a bit. So I'm going to be chewing on that one for a while.
Exactly for the right person at the right time then.
Amen.
What about you? What do you want to leave for someone else? What question do you want to leave for another oficial to answer?
Sure. So, I am I just turned 47, and so I am in my emerging elder era, or I'm entering my señora era, and so happy about it. And so this question, I am curious about, what do you want to leave behind? What do you want to leave in this world? Is a question that I am thinking about, and so I'd be curious to hear others answer.
We will ask that question then on your behalf. Stephanie Ybarra, thank you so much for being here with us and for making the time and to tell us your story. It has been absolutely wonderful to hear.
It's been a delight. Thank you so much for having me. This has been a pleasure.
This episode of Actoras was hosted by Jimena Varela and produced by Anush Titanian. It was recorded in Washington, D.C. and Houston, Texas, and mixed at the Arts Management Program at American University, Washington, D.C.
The music was Hace que exista, Make It Exist by Eli Elmi, and the graphic design was by Bia Silva.
Find us on YouTube at Actoras and on Instagram and Facebook at Actoras Podcast.